So thank you everybody very much for coming. My name's Luke, for those that don't know me already. And it's winter. And given that it's winter, all of our deciduous trees will be or should be bare of leaves, as this one is. So winter is a good time of year to be talking about deciduous trees because we can actually see them. We can actually see the structure of the tree and what's going on. So it's a good time to get in there and do pruning and wiring work while we can actually see them and they're not covered in leaves. So because we're going to talk about deciduous trees today, and Andrew Edge, our visiting demonstrator, is also going to talk about deciduous trees next Saturday, I believe it is. And we're also going to talk about deciduous trees at our first meeting back, if you could recall, first Tuesday in August. I thought, well, we better carve up that deciduous pie into a few different pieces so that we're not doubling up too much. So I thought today I would talk about just one species of deciduous tree, which is desert ash. This is a desert ash, which some of you will know as Fraxinus angustifolia, subspecies angustifolia, which is a bit of a mouthful, which is probably why we tend to just call them desert ash or even just ash. Yeah, so we have ash as bonsai, probably for the same reason as we have olive trees as bonsai, which is that they're readily available, or have been at times, readily available in Adelaide because they are a weed, they are a pest. They're an incredible pest, usually in creek areas, which makes the common name of desert ash seem a bit odd, in that these things tend to be in creek and river systems where there is plenty of water. So why the common name desert ash, I don't know, it's beyond me because they seem to drink a fair bit of water. But other than them being readily available, I guess the reason to grow them as bonsai is because they're incredibly suitable. They've got lots and lots of wonderful attributes that make them a really beautiful tree. So I think the first thing that grabs me on desert ash trees is the wonderful bark. And I don't know how well that camera can see the quite corky bark on that tree, but yeah, there is this really wonderful corky, fissured, textured bark on there, which is really quite the feature. If this was a smooth trunked tree, the same tree but with smooth bark, I think it would be probably less than half as interesting. But it started off as a tree with smooth bark. I've had this tree for about maybe 20 or 25 years. It sounds a long time even to me. But when I first got hold of this tree, it did not have corky bark up the entire length of the tree. There was a bit of corky bark down the lower section of the trunk here, and all the rest of the trunk and branches were all quite smooth bark. And basically just through the aging process over the last 20 or so years, this thing has got progressively more and more corky bark. So the tree and I are both aging together. I'm sure I was perhaps a bit more smooth-skinned 20 years ago as well, just like the tree is. Yeah, so this is a tree that I've had for a long time, which is good and bad. It's getting some good aged bark there, but it also means that it's had 20 or 25 years worth of mistakes. Given that I started making this tree many years ago when I didn't have the bonsai experience that I have now. It was all a bit of trial and error. You don't always know what you're doing, and if there's going to be mistakes made, well, they'll be made on your first trees. And this is one that I feel, although it looks a really interesting tree, plenty of character, to me, I feel that it's a tree that I started as a beginner, and I'll always sort of feel like that about it, mainly because of its structure. When we think of traditional bonsai styles, one that often comes up is informal upright. Informal upright is a bonsai design style we often teach people when they're starting out. It features a trunk that has a sort of gentle S-curve in it, as this tree does, and then branches placed left, back, right, as the branch structure. And that's exactly what this tree has. So when I look at this tree, as interesting as it might look, to me, it's just starting to look formulaic. It looks more like a bonsai and less like a tree, like a real ash tree would. So I've been spending a lot of time looking at mature ash trees. The trouble is trying to find some that have just been let to grow naturally and not pruned by the council or ETSA as a street tree, because Iroquois is not growing naturally. And trying to decide what sort of structure, if I was going to change this, how would I change that structure? So I guess in any bonsai design, we've got to look at what the best features of the tree are, try and highlight those, and perhaps try and disguise some others. So I really like, from this point here, if this is the current front of the tree, I really like the flare of the roots at the base here. It's very nice, but from this front, we have this sort of slightly formulaic S-bend in the trunk. So I thought that one way to correct that would be to just reverse it and go for what is currently the rear of the tree, which also has the same flare in the root structure there, but slightly less of the formulaic S-bend in the trunk that you can see there. The movement is just slightly different, or perhaps it's just different to my eyes because I've been looking at this front here for so long. And so, often something different is a novelty. Because the movement from the back there is different, it's just starting to look more interesting to my eye. So I'm considering making a new front for this tree, which might seem slightly drastic, but I think if you're going to make a really great tree, they're the sorts of considerations, rather than getting stuck on, yes, this is the tree, this is definitely it, that's how it's always going to be. Just having a look at, all right, well, what actually is the best feature of this tree? Where is the best root flare? Where is the best movement? Where are the branches best placed? And and design the tree from there. So yeah, it's a nice tree, but potentially could be more interesting. The other aspect of this tree that I also find a little jarring now is the pot. I feel that the pot is a little bit large and perhaps a bit formal, a bit aggressive for this tree. There is this interesting movement in the tree, whereas the pot is a really strong shape. That rectangular shape is really strong. It feels visually quite a heavy pot too. The dark colour and the strong shape makes it really quite a heavy pot. So yeah, I'd consider changing the pot for this one as well. If I was going to change it, my first thought is to go oval rather than rectangular, and perhaps a different colour as well. In Japan, deciduous trees are traditionally planted in glazed oval pots, usually either cream or pale blue, but we don't have to be traditional. We could go for any colour you want. I would consider perhaps a grey colour that matches the grey colour of the bark. Now, I don't know where you would find such a pot, or sort of a grey glazed oval. You'd need to probably ask a local potter. Yeah, so there's options there. All right, well, enough about that tree. I've got a number of ash trees here. I've picked ash because I love desert ash. I used to tell myself that trident maple, one of my favourite deciduous species, but I think desert ash might be the front runner for my favourite deciduous species. So we've talked that one through. Should we grab another one?
Look, before you move it.
So there was a comment there.
Yep. Before you move it, you're talking about changing the best viewing angle. If you change it, reverse it to the back, that means that the top part now leans too far away from you. How do you propose changing that?
So if I was going to do that, I'd need to change the planting angle as well. So because the tree, if we look from the side here, the top of the tree is leaning towards us slightly, which is often taught us the way to go, to have the top of the tree leaning towards you slightly. It gives you this sense that you're standing under this great towering tree, whereas from what is the back here now, yeah, the top section of that tree is leaning back away from you. So I would need to change that planting angle forward when it was repotted. So, and it might take a repot or two to achieve that. The other aspect of that, changing the planting angle so much, is that the roots are just about right where I want them. So it would mean sort of burying some of the roots and exposing others with that change of planting angle. So, which is why I'm umming and ahhing. I've been umming and ahhing for some time, and I shall probably continue to and ah for a bit longer.
Okay.
Okay. Is there any other questions about this one? No, we're all happy? Okay. All right, let's grab another desert ash. All right, as they say on TV, here's one I prepared earlier. All right. You can see that okay. I'll get out of the way. You probably see it a bit better now. All right, so another desert ash. This is a $10 tree. I saw this tree on the sales table at one of our annual shows, I don't know, 8 or 10 years ago, quite some time ago. It was in a little black plastic pot, probably about a little 100 ml pot, tiny wee little thing. It was $10. And I thought, well, I like desert ash. It's only $10. I'll take it home. How bad can it be? So I bought this little desert ash, got it home. When it was repotting time, I got it out of the pot and discovered that instead of having a good fibrous root system, as these trees often do, you know, lots and lots of fibrous roots, that this little tree had two sort of sticky out roots like this, and that was it. Just two thick roots sticking out at an odd angle. And I thought, well, how am I going to make a nice nabari, as they call it, a nice root spread out of these two funny roots sticking out? It's just not going to work. I'm going to have to either cut off virtually all of the roots and start again, treat it as a cutting basically, cut the roots off and start again, make new roots, or I'm going to have to think outside the box a bit. And so I did. I've got a piece of rock, and it's actually two pieces of rock sort of sandwiched together. They just happen to be both the same shape, same sort of colour. And I've put the two roots, one on this side and one on this side, over the two rocks, put some sphagnum moss over that, tied the whole thing up with grafting tape, and buried it into potted it into a slightly bigger pot, and let it grow on. And I've let it grow there for, oh, I don't know, it's probably a couple of years before I was tempted to unearth it all, unwrap it, and see how well those roots had fused onto the rock. So I'm a bit of a fiend for root over rock style. I love root over rock style trees. At that point, I don't think I'd tried to, Matt's laughing at me. He knows I'm crazy for a root over rock style tree. And yeah, so at that time, I don't think I'd attempted to grow a desert ash over rock. Who knows if it was going to work? Only one way to find out. So yeah, so this is the result. The $10 tree that had dreadful roots, planted over a nice piece of rock, and yeah, spent a couple of years for the roots to cling onto the rock to the point where I could unearth it, plant it in a shallower bonsai pot, and develop all these branches. So the branching on here is quite tight. You know, I've been clipping this tree quite hard because the focus for this tree is the rock and the roots here and the corky bark on this trunk here. So I don't want a tree that is a great big tall spreading thing that's going to take my eye away from this feature here. I really want to be able to see the rock and the roots there quite clearly, which is why I've kept this tree as quite a low growing tree, and quite short branches, starting to get fairly sort of tight ramification on it, to act as a frame for the roots and the rock we've got here. So yeah, so for a $10 tree, I'm fairly happy with it. There's not a lot I would change about this tree at the moment. This is actually its first bonsai pot. I'm not sure about the colour for this one. When I look at the colour of a bonsai pot, I've learned recently that having the colour of the pot that has one of the colours in the tree already is a good idea. So we don't introduce too many colours, it just becomes a bit of a distraction. So this tree has this reddy coloured rock, the sort of pale creamy grey colour of the bark, and obviously green leaves for most of the year. So, all right, one of the colours is green in that tree. All right, let's go with a green pot. Whether that works or not, anybody care to vote? Is the green pot a winner? Does it need one of these grey coloured pots?
I like the green.
You like the green?
I like the green. From my screen, it looks like a kind of a bluey green. It's hard to tell from my screen. I'm not sure.
Yeah, it's a sort of olivey kind of green. It's an interesting green pot. It's not a shock or a bright green pot. It's an interesting green. And when the tree is in leaf, it actually works better. There's more green in the whole composition. The pot suits it better then. Also, when the tree is bare, the pot, of course, looks a bit larger because when this thing is in leaf, there's this green canopy sitting on top. So it's perhaps a tree that looks actually better in spring and summer when it's in leaf. Although deciduous trees are often displayed in winter when we can actually see the structure of the tree. So I guess that means I just need to repot it twice a year, have it in its nice grey winter pot for winter display, and in its green pot for spring display. Who's got that much time on their hands they can repot a tree twice a year? Not many.
Luke, would you consider either a smaller pot or a shallower pot?
Smaller pot or shallower pot was the question from Gail. So in a visual sense, yes, but in a horticultural sense, no.
Right.
This tree tends to drink a fair amount of water. Most of my desert ash trees seem to require a fair amount of water. I think if it was in a shallower pot in Adelaide summer, it would just be difficult to maintain. I'd be watering it 5 times a day to keep up with the watering. So yes and no. Yeah, there's a balance there between, wouldn't this thing look fantastic if it was growing in a saucer as big as your hand?
Yeah.
Well, the smaller the pot is, the more it accentuates the tree. But then in a horticultural sense, the smaller that pot is, it just is harder and harder to maintain. So I'm probably guilty of over potting the trees to keep them good and healthy, have lots of space for the roots there to grow and suck up water and nutrients. So yeah. All right.
Okay, thank you very much. Yeah.
Any other questions about this one?
You were talking about the having two pots, and we're having a laugh, but in Japan that's what they do. And if a tree is going into a competition, they'll have. When Koji was out here in 2015, he was saying that the competition pot would be smaller and shallower, and then when the competition was finished, they take it out and put it into a slightly bigger pot. So when you see the photographs of those beautiful Japanese trees, they're often not in the pot that they're growing in 12 months a year. It's just a pot for that display. So yeah, so if we were having a convention or something, having a big international convention or a national convention, and that tree was going in it, you could put it into a shallow pot for that convention and then put it back in that one. But I think that tree looks really nice. I really like the line that goes horizontally around the pot. Kind of compresses it down a bit. I think, yeah, I reckon it's good.
And that's Matt talking about display pots. That's certainly an issue outside of Japan. You know, we see these amazing photos of trees in tiny pots and think, well, that's how a tree needs to be maintained all year round. The size of the pot, the way it's maintained, everything has been pruned and wired to perfection. And we imagine that all of the trees are like that all year round. Well, it's not the case. Get over to Japan and have a look in the nurseries. And some are looking fantastic, but some trees have been de-wired, the branches are flopping around, the foliage has grown out, you know, the trees are having a rest. So they don't all look like that all year round. So if you have any trees in your garden that you think that's looking a bit shaggy and you're feeling a bit depressed about it, like you're not working hard enough, do yourself a favour, don't worry about it. All right, so I'll grab another desert ash. It was interesting getting around in my garden, picking up all these desert ash trees and thinking to myself, oh, I've got a lot of desert ash trees. This is good. So this is another tree that I've had for a long time, 20, 25 years. It was much smaller years ago. It has pretty well always been grown in this exaggerated windswept style. I do like a good, scary, spooky looking windswept style tree. I'm happy with the tree. The pot is another matter. You probably hear me talking about pots a lot. As I spend more and more time making pots, and of course part of the process of making pots is matching pots to trees, or matching trees to pots, I'm more and more aware of perhaps which pots suit which trees better, and that makes me more and more aware of how many trees in my garden are in the wrong pot. And I think I'm coming to the conclusion that every tree in my collection just about is in the wrong pot. So now I've created this long road of making a whole lot of new pots to suit the right tree. And perhaps just means that I'm getting better at understanding one more aspect of bonsai, which is matching trees and pots. So it's a long road. Just when you think you know it all, oh, here's another path. I haven't been down that one. Well, let's go. So I'm a bit torn about the pot selection for this tree. Because the tree is this exaggerated windswept style tree, you know, particularly when it's bare of leaves in winter, it looks rather a forlorn sort of image, rather weather beaten, perhaps a bit dark and ominous, and the pot is also quite dark and ominous. So in that sense, perhaps they suit each other. But on the other hand, the visual mass of the pot is quite large. You know, when you look at the size of the tree, it's not so bad when it's in leaf. The tree, of course, is a bit bigger again when it's in leaf. It carries the weight of the pot a bit more. But at this time of year, when it's bare of leaves, the pot looks too large. It looks too large in terms of its depth and its colour and its visual weight. Because it's quite deep and because it's quite dark in colour, and because it sort of sits quite squat, quite heavy, all of those things together make it quite heavy visually. Not heavy in a physical sense, but visually heavy. So I think if you had the same shape pot, but without the very dark colour, you know, if this was, you know, we could speculate what's a nice light colour. You know, perhaps if this was a nice sort of cream coloured pot, the visual weight, even if it's the same size pot, the cream coloured pot would sit visually far less heavy than this one. Another idea that I've been chasing is that I could have a pot that carries the same sort of movement as the tree. So this pot is a static shape. It doesn't have any particular movement one way or another. So I've been toying with the idea of having a pot that has some movement. And here's one I prepared earlier. So here is a pot that would perhaps carry, can you see that? It's a crescent style pot. The pot actually has a bit of direction. So we could set up a pot that has some movement in the same direction as the tree. The pot also is far less deep than this pot. And it's a bit of a lighter colour. It's still got a fair bit of dark colour in there, but it's a lighter coloured pot. They're probably still a bit too large for this tree, but that style of pot. And of course, there's only one way to find out. Get the tree out of this pot now, into a pot like this, give it a go. Sometimes what you thought was a great idea, maybe it doesn't work. I repotted an olive tree the other day. I think I pulled 4 different pots off my shelf here. None of them worked. I thought they were all a good idea as I was picking them up off the shelf. But when I've got the tree into the pot, no, every one of them, too big, too heavy, too something. So it can be quite a journey, quite an exercise. So, but I'm keen to get the pot right with this one because I do like this tree. Not everybody likes that exaggerated windswept style, but it's a style that I really like. It's quite evocative. It speaks of a strong, windswept environment. The other thing that I keep changing with this tree is what is the front and back, the best viewing angle. So some years it's this one here, and other years I decide, no, it's the other way around. Both kind of work for different reasons. I can see there's really these sort of 2 distinct areas of foliage, 1 and 2. I can see both of those from either side. I can see all the various twists and turns in the branches from either side. So both kind of work. But either way, I think the pot is still visually a bit too large. Any questions about this one?
Yeah, I've got one. So
Yes.
I agree that the pot looks a little heavy. I always struggle with semi-cascade and windswept with pot styles. How shallow do you think you could go with a tree like that?
Well, in a horticultural sense, yeah, this pot would happily live in a smaller pot. What I do like about the height of this pot is that it creates this larger negative space here. When you have a tree like this, with this elongated, low branching, such as this one has, in a shallow pot, you lose that negative space that's there, and it feels incredibly different. You lose a lot of this movement, the sense that this branch here or branches are projecting out into that environment is carried that much better in this taller style pot, semi-cascade style pot. When you put it in a shallower pot like this, and you've got very little negative space in between that lower branch and the rim of the pot, it feels very different. It feels wrong in that pot. So I think that's why, part of the reason why I've kept it in that taller pot, because I really like that negative space that's created in here. And you'd lose that in a shallow pot. So I think perhaps the answer is still to have this taller semi-cascade style pot, but perhaps slightly smaller and a paler colour, a nice pale colour to make the whole thing visually smaller. All right. I hope that answers your question.
Yes, it does. Thank you.
All right, we'll grab another one. So I've got a question for you all. How's the time going?
Easy. You got over half an hour yet.
Yeah, plenty of time? Okay, great. All right, because I've got a whole pile of desert ash trees here. I'm going to bore you to death with desert ash trees. You thought I was going to start talking about olives? Get it. Desert ash, all the way. All right, so we had a slightly spooky, windswept looking desert ash there, and now we've got another one. So this is a tree here. This tree's got a bit of history for me. I've had this tree a long time, and 5 years ago we had a national bonsai convention here in Adelaide, and somebody clever thought it would be a good idea for Matt and myself and Chris Drinkwater to get up on stage in front of a couple of hundred people and talk about all the things that we knew about the world of bonsai, which was a hell of a thing. Matt and I think, Chris, we're still scratching our heads now as to who thought it was a good idea to let us up on the stage in front of this national convention. But anyway, here we are. So this is one of the trees that I had up on stage that I talked through at the time. So desert ash, it's in this exaggerated, spooky, windswept style. I'll get out the way there so we can see it all. It's a little bit hard to get this one on the right angle for the camera to see. So the design of this tree, because the trunk, the way the roots are set and the way the trunk is set on this angle, it's very hard to do anything with this tree other than have all of that movement carried in the same direction as the trunk. I've had this tree in years before with the trunk obviously set in the same angle, but branches carried left and right like an informal upright tree, a much more relaxed looking tree, and it just doesn't work. All of the branches that are on this side of the tree look completely contrary to the movement of the trunk. The whole thing looks wrong, and so I've decided some years back to just stick with this strong windswept, rather spooky windswept style tree, and run with that. So basically, developing this tree, I've been doing an awful lot of pruning on the uppermost branches in the tree to keep these in nice and tight. Most trees are what they term apically dominant, which is the growth tends to want to be in the upper part of the tree rather than lower. And so the job is to get in and clip the upper part of the tree quite hard and let the lower branches grow, elongate so that they can thicken. And so that's been the main task with this tree in the last 5-6 years, a number of years. What's been going on with this lower branch here is that you can see all this interesting movement and taper that's going in that lower branch in there. It's taken quite a few years to develop that branching. So this section of branch here was at some point much longer. I've let it grow right out here, and once it's got to a decent thickness, I've then cut it short right back here. We've then gone through that process again here and here and here and here, and every couple of years letting this thing grow out and thicken and then cut short again. And I'm now starting to develop this rather sort of thick, gnarly branching here that changes direction sort of quite frequently in a quite short space to suit the branching that's going on at the top here, because all of the branching up the top that gets pruned quite regularly is developing this rather thick, gnarly feel about it. And I'm finally getting the lower branching to match the upper. But the only thing that's left to do on this tree now is all this very long secondary, tertiary branching that's out here is about ready to be cut short. A bit hard to see with me in the shop there. Let's get out of the way. About ready for this all to be cut short back in here to suit the silhouette of the tree. Another aspect of this tree that's been a little bit of a challenge for me to get my head around is that I've had to grow this branching much longer than you would have thought necessary. So when we have an informal upright type tree, we've got, here's the trunk, silhouette here, we've got branching down the bottom of the tree that is longer than it is at the top of the tree. And that's just because those branches are heading out to catch the sun, which is why the tree is the shape it is. So the branches at the bottom are slightly wider or longer than the branches that are at the top. But of course, if you do that with this tree, if you have the branches at the bottom slightly longer than they are at the top, we end up with all of the branches pretty well in a straight line here. Because the trunk starting right back here, having the branches down the bottom here slightly longer than the ones at the top, means that the silhouette of the tree gets cut short here. And so the branches of this tree, to create that flow, that triangle silhouette that we're always looking for, to create that in this tree, these branches have had to have been grown much, much longer than I thought would have been necessary to actually carry that look. Now, they are too long now, and they will be cut back short in about here to suit the look of that tree. So I think that was the learning there, getting the branching on that tree long enough to actually suit the design of the tree. Now, and as interesting as the tree is, at the 2015 convention, we were up on stage talking these things through, and I had this tree in a different pot at the time. It was quite a boring looking pot, and I talked this tree through and said that it's, you know, it's kind of an odd, spooky looking tree. Where am I going to get a good, spooky looking pot? And I then lifted this rather odd looking pot up on the display where the audience could see, and there was this audible ooh, ah, that I could hear when this crazy looking pot went up on display. So I think the pot actually made more of an impact than the tree. The pot's actually a fiberglass and cement fondue made pot, which was a bit of an exercise to make. I probably won't make another one. Anything else like that I would just make out of clay and fire now. But yeah, so interesting tree, interesting pot. Unconventional, but interesting. Any questions about that one? I think we're happy. All right, let's grab another one. All right, so I've talked through a number of desert ash trees, and I think the thing that I've questioned about all of them so far is the pot. I've said that they're all in the wrong pot. And there's some learning to be had there. Now, with this tree, you can argue that I'm wrong, but with this tree, I think I've actually nailed it and finally got the right tree in the right pot. So it's a tree that I've styled in this particular way, and a pot that I have made deliberately to suit that tree. So I've had the opportunity to pair the two together, and some of the feedback that I've had so far has been that, oh gosh, it just looks like it was born into that pot. It looks like it was always there, even though the tree's only been in that pot for about a week. Yeah, the comments that the shape of the pot just suits the shape of the tree. So I'm happy with it. I'm happy with although it's a fairly deep pot, it doesn't feel nearly as big and heavy as that dark coloured pot we had before, because of the lighter colour. The colour of the pot's very similar to the colour of the trunk, so the two tend to bounce off each other there a bit. The movement in the tree is carried by the movement in the pot. The angles in the branching, you see the angles in the branching and the angles in the rim of the pot carry together. So I think that one accentuates the other. The tree is carried well in the pot, and the pot carries the tree well. They work well together. Even though it's an abstract shaped pot, you know, not a regular shape like a square or rectangle, and that might be something to get your head around a bit for those that are just used to seeing regular traditional shaped pots, pots that aren't an abstract shape like this. But it's one that I'm really happy with. So the tree itself was actually growing in the ground for some years. I saw this in somebody's backyard. It has been grown as a Niwaki, I suppose they call it, a great big garden tree. This thing was 10 times the size it was now. It was a huge, great thing in the ground, and its owner had been running the hedge trimmers over the top just to keep this thing in this sort of large shrubby shape for some years. And it hadn't really had any bonsai training other than some years ago, before it was planted in the ground, there had been this first curve at the base of the trunk wide in there, and had been growing as a bonsai for a while, but its owner had decided, I can't be bothered maintaining bonsai anymore. It's going into the ground, and I'm just going to spend the next 20 years running hedge trimmers over the top. It was sitting in quite a sheltered, shaded spot, so this thing hadn't been getting much light, so it's actually not put on a lot of size, despite the number of years that this thing has been in the ground. So yeah, so I was visiting this person, saw the first curve in the trunk there, and thought, I need to have that. So I made them an offer, got out a shovel, and dug it up here on the spot, and spent the last couple of years wiring all of the branching here, cutting out all the old branching, growing new branches, and wiring all those branches to suit the angles in the trunk that are here, to suit that movement. So I've hopefully now got some interesting movement, interesting branching, and in an interesting pot also. For now, this is the front of the tree. As with the trees that have quite strong movement like this, and the movement is meant to be seen differently from one plane or the other. Sometimes the back will look as good as the front, because you can still see all of that movement in there. Yeah, so for the moment, I find it really interesting tree, interesting movement. Any questions about that one? Having just told you all how great it is now, you can tell me all about all the faults that you find with it. Everyone's happy.
I'll agree. I reckon it looks fantastic. I love that. That's really, really nice. The angles of all the branches, the way you can see all the branches, and the taper on the branches, and the kind of randomness of the way it all flows. Yeah, no, that's top notch. I really love it.
Oh, thank you. I'm happy with that. Matt's happy. I'm happy. Okay.
I say similar. I got to admit, when you first put it up on the turntable, Luke, I thought, oh, gee, that pot's way too big. But as you rotate it, the slightly different viewing angles make it, I don't know, come into its own a little bit. And if I was to be critical at all, the only thing I could find, and this is me personally, obviously not you, it's not my tree, it's probably just that fraction too far forward in the pot. Could probably go back towards the back of your pot, maybe an inch or so. But then that's me looking at a TV screen rather than in the flesh. So
yeah, I do agree. This is its first bonsai pot. It was in a sort of larger black plastic pot after I got it out of the ground. So yeah, its first potting, that was the best spot I could get it in for the moment. It may well move yet. So yeah, you're absolutely right. Yeah, it's also another one of these trees that, well, like lots of trees, when I take photos of them, it seems hard to capture all of the movement and the feeling in a photo, and it's perhaps slightly better in the video format. But it's a tree that, to me anyway, it feels far more impressive sitting on the bench out the back here where I can see it than it does in a photographic sense. So
no, I agree with that. So
when you see trees that look great in photos, they must be really great. All right, I'll grab another one.
With all your ash, what do you put? What's in your mix?
Okay, so the question was, what's in the mix? What's in the potting mix? It keeps changing. I've been going for a more open mix. And by open mix, I mean a mix that has larger particles. Or I suppose it's as much about not having fine particles in the mix. I've been reading about nutrient uptake being in line with available oxygen. So we need oxygen or air in the mix for the roots to be taking up that nitrogen. The way to do that is to have a mix that doesn't have fine material in there. So this has large particles of composted pine bark, pumice, perlite, fairly large particles. So I think for me, it's as much about the particle size as the material. As long as it's something that does hold a bit of water and drains and still has some air in there because of a reasonably large particle size, then it seems to work.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, let's grab another one. Oh, this one's heavy. Gosh. All right. Now, before I go any further with this one, I'll say thank you to Phil. I don't know if Phil Eckers was watching today, but this was a tree that Phil collected some years ago. Phil's been downsizing a bit, and it's a tree that I've ended up with. Yeah, so it's a collected ash tree. It's had some fairly major cuts done when it was collected, some saw cuts. The taper and movement that you can see in this tree has been achieved by some really large cuts being made. There's some very large cuts on the back here, and at the next turn here, and here again, and there was further branching up here that I've cut away. The cuts have been made just with a saw, and so there had been these sort of quite large flat saw cut areas that were really easily noticeable as a flat saw cut, and it immediately looks like something has just been pruned flat with a saw rather than a natural looking tree. You know, it looks man-made because of the flat saw cut. So what I've done is I've got in there with a carving tool, a power tool, a die grinder, with a specialised bit on the end there, and I've got in and I've carved away as irregular a shape as I can into what was a fairly round, flat saw cut. So the edge of the wound has been made irregular, and the depth of it as well has been made irregular. So once it all weathers, it should hopefully look much more natural than the flat saw cuts that were there before. So that's my phone whistling at me. That was nice. So yeah, so that's been part of the work for this tree. It was just in a big foam box. I've got it out of that foam box into a much more natural looking pot. Taken away those flat saw cuts that were here with, hopefully, it's a bit hard for me to see how well the camera can see what were these flat saw cuts in here that I've hollowed out. Yeah, so done that carving work, and this tree was also quite a bit taller as well. Because these ash trees have such wonderful bark where it's aged, I was a bit hesitant to keep a lot of this upper branching that was up here, because the upper branching has all this smooth bark. So I can either wait for the smoother bark branching up here to age and get the same corky bark as there is down here, or I could just cut it short. So I've just got the saw out and cut again. There was a lot more branching on here that I've cut away, so I'm going to develop that branching again. And yeah, hopefully it will be an interesting tree. It's certainly got plenty of movement and taper in there.
Can you see it staying in that pot long term?
I don't know.
Because it comes across here as being a very heavy pot underneath the trunk at the moment. I mean, again, that's me. It looks like, almost looks like a birthday cake sitting under it, to be honest.
Happy birthday! Yeah. I guess the first issue was because this thing had been in a great big polystyrene box, was getting it out of that and into something that it would actually comfortably fit in. So yeah, you're right, there might not be the forever pot because it is visually quite heavy, but it's the smallest pot that I could get it into without cutting away too much of the roots. I've cut away probably 2/3 of the roots to be able to get it into this pot. The other aspect of the pot that I'm not sure about is that it's very similar to the trunk colour, which initially I thought was a good idea. I thought, okay, if I have a pot similar colour to the trunk, well, it will draw out more of that colour of the trunk. But now I look at it and think, well, the pot colour and the trunk colour, to me, I don't know about on camera there, but to me, are so similar that you can hardly see one from the other. That there's not enough difference in colour between the pot and the trunk. So, but again, it's only been in there a week. I will sit and ponder it for a year or two, and then potentially introduce another colour to that tree. The idea was because it's quite a it's a pretty heavy duty looking tree. It should be able to carry a pretty heavy duty looking pot. It's really quite a massive trunk given the height of the tree, and yeah, so the idea being that it could carry a pot like that, but maybe it's worked, maybe it hasn't. All right, and it's just starting to leaf out now. So yeah, definitely time to be repotting ash trees. Any more questions about this one? Oh, okay, I think I've got one or two more. Now, if you could see my dining room floor at the moment, you'd see this pile of ash trees piled up everywhere. It's normal. I'm sure this is what everybody has on their dining room floor, is ash trees everywhere. All right, so this is a tree that I haven't had for too long. It was one of our club members, Peter, who had to move to another country, had to sell off some trees, and this was one of them. So this one grabbed me because it's a raft, what we call a raft style tree, which portrays a tree that has potentially at some point been upright, but due to some force of nature has toppled over and continued growing. So the trunk of the tree is lying down here, and what were the branches on one side become the new trunks for the tree. So unfortunately for this one, all the trunks that were on there were all growing in these sort of odd spots. So I've had to cut a lot of the branches or trunks away and grow a few new ones. And it's just starting to develop now. It's in its first bonsai pot, and I don't know how well the camera can see it, but there's this little hollow. You can see a bit of daylight just through there, and this neat little sort of archway in the trunk there. I quite like that little negative space that's under that bit of the trunk there. Something quite interesting about it. I want to go and hide in there or something. It's a neat little feature of that tree. I think the pot's okay. I think in terms of the design of the tree, I need to figure out, even though a raft style design is, it's a slightly out of the box design, it's not an upright tree, but I still need to find in there some way of making sense of this design. I'm thinking that there will still be that usual triangular silhouette over the top there. I mean, it doesn't have to be a perfect triangle, it might be rounded, but more or less has that silhouette. Now, at the moment, I've got the tallest trunk on this side, and then it tapers down here. Don't know that I'm happy with that. I'm thinking that this uppermost section of the trunk here should actually have the tallest branch or trunk there, form that overall triangular silhouette. So that's the bit that I'm playing with at the moment, is looking to see just how do I develop the branches or trunks on this tree to actually suit that raft style trunk. And I want it to look like a natural tree, but I also want it to look a coherent design. And at the moment, I find that the heights of the trunks here, it's just not working for me. So I think I'll perhaps continue to clip these outer trunks, keep them shorter, and this one that's in the middle here, I will let that grow taller and thicker so that we have that silhouette overall. It would be a silhouette that would be in line with the shape of the trunk. Whereas at the moment, the branching is doing the opposite of what the shape of the trunk is doing. So I think that's the fault in the design. The trunks need to be doing the same as the main trunk that's lying down here. I think that is I think that's what I'm going to do to develop that tree. And I think this is, I think it's the most difficult thing in bonsai sometimes. And it's all very well to have good horticultural knowledge. You know, I know how to feed and prune and water and weed and do all those things. I know how to do all those horticultural things. But keeping this thing alive, that's great. But what am I doing in a design sense? You know, how do I make this thing look good? You know, you look at some trees and think, I'm not sure that looks good, but I'm not sure why. What do I do to develop it? And sometimes it can take a long time, or for me anyway, it can take a long time looking at a tree and perhaps with paper and pencil, you know, sketching some designs. You've probably seen Matt and myself doing this at workshops where we sketch potential designs for trees to try and find a way to make this thing look good. So even if you're a designer or artist and you're able to visualize line and form and know what a coherent design will be, and you're able to see that quite quickly, it can still take some time with a piece of material like this to try and see, all right, what actually is, why does this work or not work? What is a great design for it? So, yeah, it's interesting in a design sense. All right, so any questions about that one? No, I think we're happy. All right, so I think I have one last tree here. All right. So, the lucky last desert ash. I'll just have a look at it for a minute before I say anything. So, this is an old tree. It's a properly old tree. I'm the third owner of this tree, and I've got a number of trees like this where I'm proud to say that I'm not the first owner. Some might say, oh, well then it's not all your work, you know, it's not your tree, it's not your design, you didn't make it all. But I'm happy with that. If you go to Japan and see some wonderful trees there that are decades old, hundreds of years old perhaps sometimes, and they're trees that have been cared for by multiple people. You know, there's no way that you could have made such a beautiful tree by yourself in the last 5 years or even perhaps your own lifetime. It's just not possible. So I'm amassing this collection of trees that I haven't made. I'm not the first owner of. This is a tree that I'm the third owner of that I know of. Yeah, as far as I know, it was started in the 1960s or 70s, and it's just a beautiful old tree. I don't think I could have made a tree quite so convincingly old looking as this tree is. The work that I've put into it has just been rearranging the branching a bit. So it was physically, when it came to me, it was physically quite a bit bigger, quite a bit more voluminous. There were more branches in here that I've removed to open up the structure. One of the things that I've been learning is a bit of the less is more approach. I think it's the best way to put it, where if you can't see all of the branches, they're not worth having. You know, if you've got 3 branches in one spot and I can't see them all clearly, then there's perhaps 1 or 2 of those branches that just isn't necessary. So this really only has how many? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 branches on this tree, which is plenty. It's enough to form the image of an old deciduous tree. Yeah, so I've reduced quite a bit. You can see, and if you can see cuts in here, decent sized cuts where I've reduced the height of this tree quite a bit. And there's been a bit of fine wiring happening here just to create a bit of that negative space. You can see some negative space between areas of branching there to keep it nice and open. I'm happy that it looks reasonably open. I'm not looking for this tree to be very full and full of fine twiggy ramification. I'm happy that it is a bit sparse like that, and I'll be keeping it that way. I actually think it makes the tree look a bit older, having that that space that's in there, that negative space. So, and it has beautiful old bark. It's got this amazing old corky bark. And some spider webs in there too, I can see. I would have cleaned them out. So once again, I think the tree's in the wrong pot. The pot's okay. The pot's all right in terms of its size. The size isn't too bad. I question whether the rectangular shape is a bit too formal for this tree. What makes it not too bad a rectangular pot is the tapered corner. If this was a straight-walled pot, if the sides of the pot were vertical or closer to vertical, it would seem much heavier. Having the taper there in the side of the pot makes it sit a little bit lighter. And the fancy little foot, I don't know how well the camera can see that, but the fancy little foot on there lifts it up a bit. But you know, I do question whether the pot in that rectangular shape is really what I want this tree to communicate. I haven't quite decided yet just what sort of colour and shape exactly is going to suit this tree. Whether I see it as a tree that's just standing by itself in a field somewhere, or whether it's part of some larger deciduous forest group. You know, all those things will decide what colour I want this to be. I want it to look an old tree, but I don't want it to look like some of the spooky windswept ash trees I've got looking here. You know, I don't want this thing to have some dark grey winter colour. I want it to be a fairly approachable tree, so it might be a pot that has a bit of glaze, a bit of pretty glaze there to bring that out. You know, perhaps a bit of a green glaze colour in there to lift it up a bit. So yeah, so that will be the things that I'll be looking to explore with this tree. Will be perhaps a different shaped pot, you know, maybe oval rather than rectangular, and perhaps a bit of colour in there, maybe a bit of cream colour or a bit of green colour, a bit of both in there. Yeah, bring out the pale colour of the bark and the green leaves in spring. But you know, I find it a really, it's a fairly simple tree, but a really beautiful old old tree all the same, and it'd be hard to hard to develop a tree like that yourself in a short period of time. It's a lovely tree. Are there any questions about that one?
I've got a question. What you're talking about the pot there, and I agree with you that a simple pot suits that tree really well. And you're talking about an oval and all those things. One thing I really like about the tree are the little cloud feet, and the way, for some reason, those little cloud feet works well with that tree, but I don't entirely know why. I was wondering if you had any theories as to what the little cloud feet do to a tree, because I think they look, for some reason, with that particular tree, that works really well. Have you got any thoughts on what the cloud feet do?
Well, yeah, it lifts it up physically and in a visual sense. And I think it puts the tree on a bit of a pedestal. It puts the tree on display, quite deliberately on display. Where you have a pot that has inconspicuous feet, you don't see them. But when you have an ornate foot on a pot like that, it paints a bit of a different picture. It puts this thing at the foot of the emperor rather than at the front of the peasant's shack. It puts this thing more formally on display to have that ornate feature. When you have an ornate feature like that, it says that yes, I quite deliberately want to put this tree on display. It's not just sitting there in a field by itself. I've presented it here for you all to enjoy. It is very definitely on display. I guess subconsciously we might all be reading something different into it. Perhaps the little cloud foot means that this is your perfect tree up in heaven. We're all going to imagine something different by having that ornate foot there. And it's not always apparent why, which is why you need to try all these different things, different shapes and colours and a different foot and a different design, and it will mean something different to all of us. But I think that comes full circle back to the main point I make with any of these, which is that you should try to have a coherent design in mind in your own head and know what it is that you want to communicate. Once you know what you want to communicate, then you know, all right, I've got a plan. What tools do I now need to try and communicate that with shape and colour and line and form? So I think just being aware of how all those different elements can affect the overall composition is the best thing to do. That's perhaps the best learning there is don't be blind to all the different aspects that are there, all of the colours and shapes and textures that can affect the overall design.
Luke, to my eye, that pot suits that tree beautifully because their focus is actually on the tree, not on the pot. And that's sometimes something that concerns me, that with the emphasis on the pot then takes pride of place rather than the tree itself. Any ideas on that one or comments on that?
Well, a couple of things. It's because you do hear that a lot in tree and pot matching debates. Is I hear people comment, "Oh, the tree should always be the focus," and I feel that with XYZ composition, that the pot is drawing away from the tree. Now, I'm not quite sure how that thinking's developed, but the fact that I hear it sort of rolled out the same way each time means that it's become part of sort of bonsai law that the tree should always be the focus and not the pot, without us actually sort of consciously thinking about whether that's right or wrong. I think what I'm starting to see more in bonsai design is an overall composition. So it's not a tree in a pot or a pot holding up a tree. It's this one vision that we've created
They're
And-
complementary.
Yeah, and it should all work together. You know, if I had this tree in a bright pink pot, you'd say, well, gosh, Luke's put a tree in a bright pink pot. You know, so he's either got it wrong or is trying to communicate something. You know, what's Luke trying to communicate by having this tree in a bright pink pot? So, I mean, that's obviously an extreme example, but
We should try it.
perhaps. Do you dare me, Gail?
Why not?
I'm going to draw your attention to, it was in Melbourne, I think, one of the conventions that was down there, and I can't remember if it was the last one or the one before that. It was probably the one before that. Joe Morgan Paler had that small square pot. I think it had a pine in it. I won't swear to it, but it was bright purple.
Yeah, it was a small elm. There was a little tree, little pot. It was only about this sort of size, in a square pot that had a sort of pronounced lip on the pot.
Yep.
And the pot was bright purple.
And it worked.
It was quite obvious. And I talked to Joe about it, and he said that he'd done it deliberately.
Yep.
He'd done it deliberately because he knew that people would say, a bright purple pot. It was quite a deliberate act. And it was just the sort of thing that Joe would do as a conversation starter, just, you know, to make us think, because we wouldn't normally see a bonsai planted in a bright purple pot. It doesn't mean that it's right or wrong just because it's not common. So I think that's the thing, is just to think about, well, you know, why can't we have a bright purple pot? I mean, the purple's a beautiful colour, just like yellow's a beautiful colour and pink's a beautiful colour. Why can't you have a purple pot? Saying that you can't have a purple pot for no reason makes no sense. So, yeah, so I do hear that argument. Obviously, the tree should always be the focus, and I think that's true in the sense that you don't want to have any one element, tree or pot, hugely overpowering the other. They should be sympathetic to each other. They should work together, I think, is the probably the best way for me to understand it. Yeah, so this pot certainly it suits the tree well enough in that it doesn't distract from the tree, and the little ornate feet do lift that tree up. But it's a little formal. You know, I want the tree to look like a fairly natural looking tree, and the pot does appear a little more formal than I would like it to. Yeah, so, but of course there's no right or wrong answer. Different trees in different pots, you can play with it endlessly and perhaps never get the tree in the right pot. Yeah, it's an ongoing exercise, and I think the main thing is just to be aware of what it actually does make you think and feel with each composition, rather than just making any automatic judgments or having any prejudices about what tree should go with what pot. Actually really think deeply about what's going on and what it communicates.
Luke, if you did decide to make a pink pot, my daughters would be extremely happy, but they would prefer some glitter on it as well. Maybe think that if my daughters were making a bonsai, they would want it to look like a fairy garden, and they would want to have little unicorns and little plastic toadstools type of thing, and a pink glittery pot would suit that mood really, really well. And so, I guess the pot and the glaze has to set off the mood that you're trying to. So in some instances, a pink pot would work really well.
Yeah,
So that's the focus of our next show, is it? That
Yes,
pink
yes.
pot with the glitter and the unicorns and everything. Right, you're on. You're on.
And I think that's a really important point. You know, there's lots of different people in the world, and we all like different things, and we're all affected by things differently. There is no right and wrong when it comes to pink and glitter or dark brown. I remember a while ago, Matt and myself were at the National Bonsai and Pension Collection of Australia in Canberra, having a look around there, and there was a Penjing landscape on display with multiple trees in this one very large setting, and there were some little figurines, little animals and things in that composition. And one of the things was like a little reindeer, like a little deer type creature, and it was an amazing colour. I remember it being sort of bright red or rainbow colours or something. It was, you know, to my eye, it was absolutely shocking colour. And I couldn't look past it. I could hardly see the trees for this fantastic rainbow coloured little deer thing that was in that composition. But it was there at our National Bonsai and Penjing collection. So I'm not sure if that automatically gives it merit, but it was there. And it was there because somebody had put it there deliberately and was trying to communicate something with it. Now, I'm not sure whether it was communicating the same as Joe was trying to communicate with his bright purple pot, which was a deliberate, you know, look at me statement, or if there was something there that it was communicating, but that I just didn't understand. So, yeah, there you go. There's perhaps we need to do a demonstration on colour, all of the colours and how they affect us differently. You know, perhaps we're so attuned to having these mid-brown coloured pots that, I mean, does a mid-brown coloured pot affect you all emotionally? I don't know that a mid-brown coloured pot does affect me emotionally.
No, I disagree with that because everybody's different. You know, it doesn't affect you, but it might affect someone else. I mean, looking at that from a photographer's viewpoint, as you rotate it round, I see things slightly differently. See where stop there, where the outside light coming through the window is on that side that's away from you, creates a different mood. So I might come along with my camera and go, okay, I want it to turn that way slightly because I can portray that in a slightly different way. So the colour and things like shadow tone and the cloud feet that Matt has described and all those sorts of things add something to it, to me, but maybe not to yourself. And the fact that, you know, Matt's now placed an order for a pink pot with glitter all over it for his daughters, which I'm assuming you'll have ready within a month, is again something slightly different again. So you know, we're all different, so we all see things slightly differently. While it might not invoke a mood in you, given the right light, I could probably change your perspective on that. But then I see something slightly different than you do. So, you know, we're all different, as you say. So, and that's what I'm seeing. So, Graham,
I think that's the awareness is seeing all those different colours and different features and just what it communicates. I'm perhaps wrong to say that the brown pot doesn't communicate anything to me particularly. It does, you know, it's quite a somber colour really. I think we get quite used to seeing these dark brown coloured unglazed pots, and that's perhaps why sometimes they can communicate a bit less, but just because of the virtue of the fact that they're used so often. Whereas the pink pot with glitter would be used so infrequently that it would instantly have more impact than this pot, simply because of its rarity. So, yeah, even without the fact that the pink colour would be slightly odd.
only to you.
Yeah.
It could be Matt might want half a dozen of them.
And, you know, and this is the bonsai road, you know, things keep changing. If you have a look at old photos from old bonsai exhibition albums, so Kokofu 10 albums from, the 1960s or whatever, the trees are in different pots to the styles of pots that they're in now. They're not all in pots like this. They're probably more frequently in round pots, in deeper pots, in painted pots. So, styles change. It does keep changing. Trends do keep changing. You wouldn't think that, bonsai was a trendy thing. Probably nobody would call bonsai trendy. It's probably the wrong word. But there are trends in bonsai, in styles of trees and in styles of pots. And yeah, you have to keep exploring that. And I think probably, if I was going to say that there's a trend in bonsai pot use in the world now, it's probably a move, not exclusively to, but more so to abstract shapes. The use of abstract shaped pots seems to be becoming more prevalent. So rather than these fixed geometric shapes, round, square, oval, rectangle, abstract shaped, free form pots, I see those being used perhaps more frequently. Whether that means that the bonsai albums of the future will all have trees all growing in abstract freeform pots, I don't know. But whether they'll all be in pink glittery pots, I don't know. Maybe that will be the next trend. But it does keep changing.
There's also, because now Australia is becoming more in the forefront of bonsai across the world, they keep talking about we're going to develop our own style. I don't like that word, but as we get more and more into Australian natives, we need to explore what they sit in, because clearly a red gum doesn't necessarily look very good in a traditional Japanese style pot. It has to have something more that's earthy or Australian. So that whole persona of what Australian style might be is something that's being explored, and you will see that evolution in pots, and you're sitting there quite happily on the cusp of an evolution.
Yeah, absolutely. You plant a red gum or a Gunzia or a Banksia or something in a very recognisable Japanese style pot. So a pot that is perhaps like this, a regular rectangular shape and unglazed, and quite recognisably has that history of coming from that place. It looks odd, having that tree in that pot can look odd. It looks as though it needs to evolve past that. What that needs to be, I don't know, but I'm certainly happy to be part of the journey. I know I've been making lots of different styles of pots that aren't traditional styles. And I'm sort of willing to stick my neck out and find out. You make lots of different pots. Some work, some don't work so well. And I don't know that we all know yet quite why some don't work better than others. But I think you've got to be willing to stick your neck out and explore it, and try. If we don't do that, if we don't go down that road of exploration, then we're stuck in the same spot forever. And that's then not art, that's just replication. So we might meet some dead ends along the way, but I think we've got to keep going down that road of exploring different species and different forms and different pots. To help us decide what looks good and what perhaps doesn't look so good. All right. Are there any more questions about Fraxinus angustifolia, subspecies angustifolia, also known as desert ash? My current favourite deciduous tree, all of which are in the wrong pot, and all are beautiful, all the same, even though they're in the wrong pot. How is the time going? We've been talking for an hour and a half. I've probably just about run out of breath. So I think I will say thank you all very much for listening in. And thank you for your questions and thank you for the discussion. It helps us all learn, myself included. And continuing on with the deciduous theme, next Saturday, I'm pretty sure it's next Saturday, our visiting demonstrator Andrew Edge will be talking about deciduous trees. Now I've checked in with Andrew to see what he is doing. He will be speaking not about desert ash, of course, but about maples more predominantly, and some more of the horticultural side of maintaining deciduous trees. So I've deliberately left that topic alone for today. We've really just talked about trees in a design sense and not so much about their horticultural maintenance. So Andrew will be talking about maples and other deciduous species and their horticultural care. So be tuning into that next Saturday at the same time to hear Andrew. And after that deciduous topic, the next deciduous topic will be at our first meeting back. Hooray! We're going to have a face-to-face meeting. Oh my gosh! At the Goodwood Community Centre. I'll be there from 7 o'clock setting up. Meeting will start at 8 as usual. Yes, and we'll talk about all things deciduous then. So I'd ask anybody that's coming along to the meeting, if you would like to bring in a deciduous tree of any kind, then bring that in. And if you would like to get up and speak about it yourself, then please do. If you're happy to leave it there and have others speak about it, then that's fine also. But yeah, please, if you do want to bring in one of your deciduous trees, please do so. And we will have a great meeting. It might be a slightly different meeting. We might all be covered in hand sanitizer and spaced apart from each other a little. But it will be great to see you all there. I'm very much looking forward to it. And yeah, we will go over this deciduous topic again then.
Thanks, Luke.
All right, thank you all very much. I think we'll probably say bye for now and look forward to seeing you all at Andrew's meeting next Saturday and seeing you all again at our first meeting back on Tuesday, the 4th of August. All right, thank you all very much.
Thank you very much indeed. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thanks, Luke. That was great.
Thanks, Luke.
Thank you.
Well done, Luke. I'll catch up with you soon.
Thank you, Alan.
Her husband.